Thank you, Reverend Marty. This right here. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of your service today. Thank you. Now, I don't have a long ministerial resume, but I am a certified minister with the Universal Life Church. Reverend Marty, does that count? No. Gosh, $50 down the drain. My sermon is titled Being Different. I will be talking about neurodiversity, but we all have differences. Yeah. It's just that some are more apparent than others. While our differences vary widely, I believe many here today can empathize with the social and emotional challenges that come from being different. If not, I'm sure you know family members or friends who have faced those challenges. First, a little bit about me. In the second grade, I was diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorder. Very few people have ever heard of that diagnosis, at least until recently at the Democratic National Convention, when millions of people were introduced to Governor Walz's son, Gus, who, like me, is diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorder. When I saw Gus unabashedly and emotionally jump up and shout, "That's my dad!" It was a great moment. And I thought, now that's something I would have done at his age. If you're not familiar with nonverbal learning disorder, you might assume it means that person is not verbal. But as my friends and family can tell you, I'm the opposite of nonverbal. Nonverbal learning disorder means I have a hard time picking up on and recognizing nonverbal cues or body language. 70% of communication is nonverbal, according to Psychology Today, so this disability has and continues to be very challenging for me. Also, I do not always anticipate how others might misinterpret what I say, and this has led me into more than a few awkward situations. Having nonverbal learning disorder puts me somewhere on the autism spectrum. Now, a common stereotype of people on the spectrum is that they are introverted math or computer nerds. I do have friends like that. But not everyone on the spectrum is Rain Man. To paraphrase an old saying, if you've met one neurodiverse person, you've met one neurodiverse person. Thank you. I am an extrovert with a math disability, but I love writing. I love words, puns, and satire. I'm a big Monty Python fan and love Randy Newman. Now, not the Toy Story Randy Newman, the 1970s Randy Newman. I'm sure some of you recall the vicious satire of his songs back then. In 2022, I graduated cum laude from Southern Illinois University with a bachelor's in communications and a minor in psychology. Thank you. While attending college, I lived independently, acted in community theater, and was a staff reporter for the student newspaper. Being on the spectrum puts me in some pretty good company. Singer Susan Boyle, actor Anthony Hopkins, scientist Albert Einstein, and painter Andy Warhol were all diagnosed with autism. Neurodiversity can show up in many ways, often characterized by neurotypical people, that would be most of you, as quirky, antisocial, bit of an odd duck. And many of us also have physical differences or disabilities that can visually set us apart, myself included. Because of those characteristics, those of us on the spectrum often face ableist prejudices, bigotry, and bias, typically starting at a young age. Kids can be cruel. In my grade school, a few kids formed a "We Hate Joel" club during recess, pushing the soccer net over me and kicking me until a teacher intervened. But lucky for me, starting in the 4th grade through high school, I was able to attend schools where bullying was not tolerated and differences were welcomed. During high school, before the holiday travel season, students used skits and stories to share amusing travel anecdotes that taught lessons. For example, busy airports with the noise, the lights, the crowds. Now, believe me, that can produce anxiety for anyone. But for a neurodiverse person, well, they're a nightmare. I remember one story of a neurodiverse boy, he's about 10 years old, going through TSA security with his family. Hidden in the very bottom of his backpack was a journal where he wrote about his feelings every day. He was very private about that journal and shared it with nobody. When the TSA agent started digging through his backpack, the boy blurted out, "Oh, you don't want to look any deeper in there." The TSA agent froze and then slowly looked up to his parents, who were stumbling all over themselves to provide an explanation. For several years, that boy had a phobia about TSA agents. I know that story is true because that little boy was me. These days, emotional or physical bullying isn't limited to school. The internet allows bullies to hide their cruelty behind screens. Perhaps some of you have experienced that. One of my many experiences with cyberbullying occurred after being accepted into FEMA Corps 2 years ago. Genuinely seeking to build connection, I joined a Snapchat group of a couple dozen new teammates before we met up for training in California. As a group of early 20-something college graduates, I would call this group very socially aware, or woke. Everyone was proudly sharing their pronouns, which were quite varied. So far, so good. Taking a cue from what I had heard in the inclusive, welcoming message at my home UU congregation in Dahlonega, and without thinking about how it might come across, I wrote, "I'm done with labels altogether." Now, that did not go over well. I was effectively canceled before the program even started. Once we met up in California, and some noticed I was a bit quirky and socially awkward, it went downhill from there. My attempts to fit in were misinterpreted and misconstrued at every turn. Now, the staff could see I was not intentionally offending anyone, and they knew I had a good heart, but alas, the damage was done. We agreed it would be best for me to resign and come home. That was very hard and depressing. Though I did learn some very valuable lessons, including that I wasn't socially mature enough for that kind of experience. But looking back, I also think it ironic that these young adults, so focused on being socially appropriate, were willing to bully someone who was neurodiverse. These experiences have left me with a distrust of people. My heart has been broken into a million little pieces over and over again. But time and time again, I have been able to piece myself back together. This is like the Japanese art of kintsugi. Kintsugi is the process of repairing broken pottery by mending the cracks with powdered gold. Though the scars remain, I am now stronger and more resilient. These experiences, both positive and negative, prove that people are capable of unspeakable cruelty, but also unimaginable kindness. Now, this brings me to the more challenging part. It's time for some introspection. Think of some preconceived notions or biases you may have heard about neurodiverse people. Neurodiverse people may have trouble verbalizing or even expressing their emotions, and they struggle with social appropriateness. But that doesn't mean that they are robots or Vulcans, logical yet incapable of emotion. Because of these differences, sometimes obvious and sometimes subtle, according to the National Institute of Health, 85% of neurodiverse people with a baccalaureate degree are unemployed or underemployed. It can be challenging to find and keep a job in a neurotypical world with its many daunting obstacles. And this is why it's important to make workplaces and UU communities more neuro-inclusive. We should appreciate and uplift neurodiverse individuals' contributions and ensure they feel valued and included on teams and groups. I can attest that it is important for neurodiverse people to feel like they can be their authentic selves without having to mask, a concept often used as a self-defense mechanism. So, how can you empower and support neurodiverse people in the workplace and our communities? Well, you can assess each person's skills to discover their strengths that can benefit your organization. Don't assume neurodiverse people are best suited for routine or repetitive jobs. We can be very creative. Be gracious and patient in communicating with someone who is neurodiverse. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Be open to providing accommodations if needed, such as noise-canceling headphones, a quiet workspace, or even sunglasses to cut the glare of the work lights. These are all helpful and simple accommodations for those of us with sensory sensitivity. And lastly, be careful not to stigmatize neurodiverse people in the workplace. There are many people who are sensory sensitive, even if they're not neurodiverse. Call out bigotry and prejudice when you see it. For example, some words are very ugly to neurodiverse people, especially the infamous R word. For Star Trek fans, it rhymes with Picard. You might think people would know better these days, but I still hear it every now and again at work. Finally, I'd like to thank all the educators out there who work to end bullying. Please continue this amazing work so we can eradicate bullying. Now, I'd like to end with an aspiration and a quote. First, the aspiration. Our goal should be to take the dis out of disability, and that leaves us with nothing but our amazing ability. Yes. And finally, a quote from the Greek philosopher Gus Portokalos from my big fat Greek wedding. Here tonight, we have apple and orange. We all different, but in the end, we all fruit. May it be so.
Thank you, Joel. That was so amazing. Let's give him one more. And we have our final song. Jean will let us know what that one is.
One thing I learned from